Good morning. Now, in the remaining, I guess, about 10 or 15 minutes, we have to, and leaving time for questions, I have the impossible task of describing research at MSU, which, because it is so multifaceted and impressive, really I will only be able to describe from a kind of macroscopic level through most of the slides, but at the end I hope to at least mention a few examples in a little bit more detail. Now, every year the National Science Foundation issues a report called the HERD report, and that's an acronym for Higher Education, Research and Development. And that is a report which ranks all of the universities in the country for their research expenditures, how much money they spend on research each year. Michigan State has done very well in this ranking over the last 5 years. We've increased our research expenditures from about $500 million to about $700 million in the last 5 years, so about a 40% gain. For the first time in our history, we are in the top half of the Big Ten. Our overall rank in the country has grown from 36 to 32, and the growth rate, the rate at which our research advances, is tops in the Big Ten. So if there were an annual Rose Bowl championship for growth in research activity on campus, we would be the multi-year defending champion of the Big Ten. In the nation, we are #1 in total Department of Energy and also combined Department of Energy and National Science Foundation expenditures, and that I think is something we can be very proud of. Now, because NSF measures these numbers in units of dollars, that is what we talk about. We talk about dollars. It's something our society is set up to measure. But do not make the mistake that the main value of what we do here is dollars. It's the impact on society of the work we do. So whether you are a scholar in humanities or in English, or whether you are a medical scientist like Chris Kontag, you are making a contribution. And it is unfortunate that we have to rely on these crude metrics. These are crude metrics which just summarize in a single number the incredible work that's being done by thousands of people on this campus. But it is a metric that we have to talk about if we're trying to be concise about what is happening. The way to think about these dollars is that every one of these dollars allows a young student, a young researcher, or an old professor like me to go in the lab or go into their office and try to do something great for our society. Now, a little self-congratulation, a little Spartan pride. MSU is now ahead of all of these universities in the ranking. So if you see your alma mater there, too bad for you. We don't even think about these schools anymore. We're looking up in the rankings. There are about 30 schools that are ahead of us in the rankings still, but almost all of those schools that are ahead of us because they have large medical research complexes. Okay, let me repeat that. Those schools that are ahead of us, almost all of them, are ahead of us because they have large medical research complexes. And for many of those schools, the medical research number dominates all of the research done in all of the other departments on campus because they have a ginormous hospital. We don't have that, and our portfolio looks quite different. In our portfolio, a small fraction of our total, small but growing fraction of our total, comes from medical research. But what this means strategically is that we have a lot of room to advance. We expect to grow into that list of 30 institutions that are ranked above us and to add to the list of institutions that we rank ahead of. Let me give you two examples of really the top schools that are in this ranking but do not rely on big medical numbers to drive their HERD ranking. One is Berkeley, which I think many people would say is a top public university in the United States, and also the home of Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, so they have a big intrinsic advantage from that. Their research number is only about 10% larger than ours now. So we're within 10% of the top public university in the country, which has accounted for, I can't even remember now, the number of Nobel Prize winners associated with Berkeley. And so I think that's something we should feel quite good about. On the other hand, it maybe speaks to the limitations that we maybe only have another 10% that we can hope to get out of non-medical activities on campus. We're already at the top of what we can hope to achieve without getting more money from, say, NIH, for example. The other school, which is a powerhouse without having a big medical research complex, is MIT. They're even further ahead of us, but they are also home to something called Lincoln Laboratory, which if you're a gearhead like me, you know that's a major research lab for the Defense Department. So the numbers are inflated a little bit for that. I have a quick pop quiz question for the group here. What does Michigan State, other than being a top-ranked research university, what does Michigan State have in particular in common with UC Berkeley and MIT? Can anyone answer that question? Okay. Land grant. Who said that? Someone heard me. Did you hear that from me or did you know that? I knew it. Okay. Because I often say this in conversation with people to remind you that land grant does not mean stodgy, does not mean dull, does not mean fewer Nobel Prizes than Harvard. Land grant means you can be as great as you want to be, and MIT and Berkeley are both land grant institutions, and we should not forget that. Okay, so we mentioned that perhaps the way ahead for us is through biomedicine. Chris Kontag gave you a great overview of what our biomedical research strategy will look like in the future. And here I've just reproduced two of the images that he used in his talk. So one is the complex that's being developed in the southeastern part of our campus, which I think is going to be a really impressive biomedical hub in the future. And there is the artist conception of the McLaren Hospital. I said that the thing that we lacked in competing with those 30-odd institutions that are still ahead of us is a biomedical complex. But through the leadership here at the university and the hard work of really a lot of people, because any one of these projects is a multi-year project, incredibly complex to get done, we are continuing to advance in that direction. I think this biomedical research strategy will be a winner for us. Now, we don't want to focus on money and we don't want to focus on buildings. We want to focus on people, as Chris said, on culture. And so one of the top priorities of my office is to continue the Global Impact Initiative hiring strategy. This is a hiring strategy that we launched only, I guess, 4 years ago. The goal was to hire 100 really top-tier faculty. We have largely succeeded. You can see there in the numbers. We've hired about 86 faculty members mixed between senior and junior. All of these people are hired into specific areas which were prioritized in a campus-wide prioritization process in which we looked for specific areas which would have true global impact and in which MSU could be world-class competitive. To give you an example of that, so a study that we did recently in our office, we looked at 14 new hires through GI2 that had required a startup investment of about $13 million. But even after just a few years, these people have not been on campus very long, they've already produced about $30 million in new federal funding. So the ROI from this program, Global Impact Initiative, has just been tremendous. And so with the new president coming in, hopefully in the near future, our main priority is to push for a sequel to GI2, which in abusive acronym coining, we're calling GI3, and that is the main thing that we really want to focus on. Some laurels that have accrued to our faculty. So young faculty in the last 5 or so years have won 35 NSF Early Career Awards, and 11 in 2018 alone, and that was, I think, a record for our institution. I'm told secretly that already we're at 7 or 8 NSF Career Awards on campus, and just this year, and so we may come close to reaching our 2018 record. I hope to surpass that record every year. Senior faculty have also distinguished themselves in many ways. There's really just too much to actually talk about, but I think the core observation is that the strength of the university is in its faculty, and it's in having world-class faculty, and we have to do everything we can to continue hiring world-class faculty here. More information available here. Now, so far I've mostly been talking about the macroscopic picture, our campus-wide strategy. I just want to focus on one specific thing that is a sort of trend that's happening here on the campus, and a trend which is affecting the whole world. When I first got here in 2012, and I used words like machine language or AI, people looked at me like I was from Mars. Okay, and if you remember, if you can think back, we're all losing our memories, but 7 years ago or 6 years ago, AI was really not that big a thing. Now it's on your phone. Your phone recognizes your face when you turn it on. When I first got here, autonomous vehicles were science fiction, but we went from 0 autonomous vehicles on campus to purchasing the first MSU Research autonomous vehicle to now, is John Verbonkor here? How many do we have? We have half a dozen circulating around campus at any given time. Yeah. So being in the state of Michigan, that is an area that we cannot afford to cede to other institutions. We have to be among the leaders in autonomous vehicles, in understanding how those vehicles can be safe and effective and efficient for changing the way that human transportation works in the future. One other application of AI, which Chris Kontag mentioned just briefly, is that because of the accumulation of genomic data, there are now 5 million people who have done 23andMe and gotten a genotype from them. There are 10 million people who have done it through Ancestry.com, and those numbers are on a pace to double in the next year. We are approaching a situation where there are millions of genomes available for analysis and very powerful AI programs which can be used for that analysis. One of the results that I'll share with you, which results from work here done at MSU, is on predicting breast cancer in women. So the current best polygenic risk predictor, so it's a risk predictor that looks at 1,000 different places in a person's genome and then does a computation based on the state of those 1,000 different genetic variants in your genome. It can predict which women are at high risk for breast cancer. And it's so good that the top 5%, so if you take a sample of women, you don't know anything about them, but you have their genomes, and you run this predictor on all of them, and you just take the top 5% riskiest, highest scored women, they have about a 50% lifetime chance of having breast cancer. So the care now can be allocated, mammograms, all that prevention, everything can be allocated now to the people who are most likely to benefit from it. And that's a revolutionary change in medicine that we are hoping to be a big part of here at MSU. So let me stop there, but let me say this has been we all know this has been a very tough few years for MSU, but in the background, quietly, the way Spartans do, we have been advancing the mission. And so I think we can continue doing that if we keep our optimism alive. Thanks a lot.